you for the opportunity given, and please allow me to apologize to some of my friends and colleagues. I think since 6 o'clock, an hour, almost an hour now, we thought it's going to start by 18 on the dot. I don't really know whether it's the time difference or what actually happened. So thank you. You have introduced me and also the topic, so I'll just go ahead and I'll try to see how I can run through the slides and then give room for comments, observations, and discussions of the paper. The topic is germane and also timely, as climate change has become a topical issue. And of course, there are also food concerns around the world, as poverty and hunger is gradually increasing across the globe. And we have also raised more concern on how to cope or address issues around climate change. So, we can see climate change as a threat to food systems, and as such, countries are concerned on how to address it, and it has also become a sustainable development issue. Issues around hunger and also how to alleviate poverty. As we all know, many people in developing and also low-income countries engage more in agriculture as their livelihoods and also the major source of both employment and also income generation. So climate change seems to threaten that, and many developing and low-income countries are looking at how innovative ways of seeing how that can be addressed. So food production, distribution, and consumption practices, of course, people are trying to see how that can be adapted to climate change so that it can reduce the effect, because climate change and food has a bi-causal relationship. By that I mean both the climate change is affecting food production, and also food production in a way is also affecting climate change. So we must look at how we can mitigate climate change on food production as well as food production on climate change, and we'll look at this more in the later slides. Next slide, please. Yeah, it's not only a global issue, but of course, Africa too are also concerned about climate change. And in a way, climate change has been able to affect the inputs, and there are also increased risks in terms of food supply and also food demand, and have also impact on transaction costs because of low yields and other things. The food prices tend to skyrocket. That's not to say that rather whittling down the effect of the war in Ukraine, particularly the grains, wheat, and others that would have flow from the Ukraine area to sub-Saharan Africa. So it is of great concern to Africa because of high rate of poverty, food prices, and also inequality. And we have also seen some of the effect it is having. Some countries are experiencing drought, some countries flooding, issues that have also affect how much food is being supplied into the system. So drought and declining agricultural productivity is also posing as food security challenge, where it has become a serious issue that government across Africa are looking at ways in which more climate sensitive innovations can actually be used to address some of these challenges that is being posed by climate change, especially in the food value chain. Next slide, please. In the case of Nigeria, where we pride ourselves as the most populous and also the as the most populous and also the largest economy in Africa. Of course, the population we are talking of 206, according to the World Bank of record of 2002, in which case we also place that side by side with the poverty rate. We also see that Nigeria also has a high rate of poverty. So place that side by side the number of people who are engaged in the agricultural sector. We expect that the level of productivity would have been high. But if you look at the ranking of Nigeria based on the Global Food Security Index, you will now see that Nigeria is also ranked among the low, or in terms of the rating, high rates, 96 out of 113, which pose serious food security challenge. And that's if we also look at the present population of 2006 that has been projected to be 400 million by the year 2050. So it calls for concern on how Nigeria needs to work in order to address, because the effect of climate change seems to be on the increase. So when you place that side by side with the likelihood of increase in population in the later years to come, then it's of great concern to the country. And if you also look at issues around food waste of about 40%, which equals about 31% of its total land use, and 5% of the country's greenhouse gas emission, according to World Bank in 2021. Then, of course, we can also see where the food system has challenge as far as the Nigerian economy is concerned. Added to that, of course, Nigeria has a population with high rate of young people that need to be fed and also need to be taken care of. So issues of nutrition and of course rapid urbanization too in Nigeria has also caused an increase in demand for food in the urban areas. And because of the urban drift, we are also having the challenge of more young able men who hitherto were engaged in agriculture in the rural areas have now moved to the city centers, thereby causing decline in the quantum of stable foods like maize, rice, cassava, and yam, likely in the livestock that usually would have come from the rural communities or areas. Next slide, please. So, if you now look at the states in Nigeria and some of the areas, Nigeria, though we see in the later slides where we now see the Nigerian climatic zones, we now see that Nigeria largely has two main zones. One is the north and one is the south. The south has more rainfall with two zones, which is the tropical and also the coastal areas. Then, of course, the north is divided into the Sahel and then the Savannah area. And of course, because of the encroachment of desertation coming from the Sahara Desert, we now find out that it is fast encroaching. And most of the northern states, where we have Adamawa, Bauchi, Borno, Gombe, Jigawa, Kaduna, Katsina, Sokoto, Yobe, and Zamfara, now calling for desertification. And these are some of the states where the bulk of the production of cereals and grains comes from. So this has largely affected the country, and that's also to couple with the insecurity crisis that this northern region is also experiencing. So you find out that the lands hitherto that are being cultivated are no longer, farmers are no longer being able to access, cultivate those lands. So it becomes a double jeopardy in terms of desert encroachment, in terms of drought, and then coupled with the insecurity that farmers can hardly go to their farm. And of course, we also have forced migration because of desertation. And then, we are also having the pastoralist and then the farmers crisis in the middle belt because they are moving from the Sahel towards the savannah area. And in a way, because of the shortage of arable land for cultivation, it has become an incessant issue in Nigeria and crisis between the pastoralists and the farmers, especially in the middle belt around Jos Plateau, Benue, around Calabar area, and also around Niger. And all these states are in the middle belt. Next slide, please. You can see the political map of Nigeria. And where I've mentioned Sokoto, Kebbi, Zamfara, Katsina, Jigawa. If you look at that belt, that is the Sahel area. So it also comes down to areas around Niger, Kaduna, Nasarawa, Plateau, Taraba, and Adamawa, which forms the middle belt. That's the Sudan savannah area. And then, of course, if you move down to around Ondo, Edo, Ebonyi, Anambra, and Oyo area, of course, that gives us the forest area. Then down to Bayelsa, Delta, Rivers, and Ogun and Toyo, Lagos. Of course, that is the coastal area. So, whatever we are looking at, this is the map that shows the landmass of Nigeria and also the countries. That's for those who may not be conversant with the geographical map of Nigeria with 36 states and one federal capital territory, making 37. So you can see Cameroon, you can also see Niger in the northern part, Benin in the south, Ghana in the east, and then the ocean surrounding the coastal area. And if you look towards the north, it's more of desert that is gradually cropping from Niger into Nigeria. Next slide, please. Yes, so these are the four major climate zones in Nigeria. Like I mentioned, you can see Sokoto, Katsina, Kano, Jigawa, Benue, and then of course the savannah. You can see Kwara, you can see Kaduna, you can also see Plateau, Adamawa, Taraba, Benue area too. And then we are talking of the forest area. You can see Oyo, Osun. You can also see Edo around there, and then Anambra and the rest. Then the coastal area, of course, we talk of Lagos, we talk of Bayelsa, we talk of rivers. We're also talking of cross river states. So in terms of climatic effect, when we are looking at probably the issues around temperature, issues or other forms of effect that the climate may have. The north, which is the Sahel and the savannah, is gradually experiencing. Then when you talk of flood, of course, floods cut across. You find both states or communities in the Sahel, in savannah, in the forest and coastal area. In the Sahel, you can talk of Jigawa that was ravaged. If you talk of savannah, of course, area around Taraba, areas around there was Menson, Kaduna, around Kwara. You also talk of Adamawa, Then if you move down, of course, areas around Oyo, Edo were also affected. Then communities in the coastal, like Bayelsa too, was also affected. And by implication, the food supply, also the food value chain, particularly on the productivity, and then down to what will be supplied to affected, and to look at how that translates into the retail food businesses in Nigeria. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes, so if we are looking at climate change and agricultural productivities, I'm emphasizing on agriculture because Nigeria as a country, most of the food that we are looking at largely comes from the agricultural sector or productivities. And the large majority of Nigerians depend on it. So when I'm laying emphasis, please understand where I'm coming from. So one of the effects that has is that climate change is gradually modifying the conditions under which agricultural activities are carried out. The temperature levels and also the rainfall distribution. The rainfall distribution coming from the north is gradually reducing. So most of the products that hitherto were being produced are now gradually not being able to have enough rainfall for maximum yield. So they are beginning to augment some of those with the products and withstand the already devastating environment in terms of desertification, in terms of drought, and the rest. Then, of course, we're also looking at issues where pests and diseases are also becoming eminent. And so, farmers are also looking towards more pest resilient crops that can be grown in those areas. Livestock too is an issue because with desertification, that means there is not enough grass for them to feed on. So they are gradually moving towards the north. And if you look at some of the countries in Africa, like Mozambique or Sudan, in sub-Saharan Africa, it has been estimated that 20 to 60% is being lost the number during drought. So we are beginning to see how desertification and drought is impacting on livestock production and also health. Then, of course, it's also affecting the forest capacity to deliver the wide range of goods and environmental services. Of course, trees are being cut down, and also because of lack of enough rainfall, some of the trees are also drying up, and high temperatures too is also affecting the community of animals that hitherto we used to find in the forest. All this is reducing um, uh, the forest population of both trees and animals that constitute part of the food that we are actually talking of. And we have also seen forest fires destroying most of some of the forests as a result of high temperatures and drying of forest trees and grasses, which in a way also leads to damaging not just the environment but also the coastal storms, which is a threat to the forest. Of course, the availability of water is also an issue. Water not just for human consumption, but also for animal consumption. And of course, because of also salting of the water will also have impact. Climate change also have an impact on the fishes in the river, and so the fresh water that hitherto is available is now being threatened. So we can begin to look at this impact at three levels. One, at the global level, which is now beginning to see an impact on global importation for food because countries are unable to produce enough. So there is supply shortages and countries need to import, which has also led to price spikes in some localities. Then also at the national level, we can look at the shocks that this is having and also the risks because of the market disruption, supply shortages, and also increase in food prices. Then we'll also look at the impact at the household. Of course, I said earlier that most of the household livelihood depends on it. So it turns out that decrease in the yields also means decline in their income and also the stability of the production that have also impacted negatively on the cost. And of course, we're also seeing clashes between the pastoralists and the farmers. All these are some of the effects that climate change is beginning to have on food production in Nigeria particularly. Next slide, please. How clear this is the food chain and the businesses. Of course, we have the climate change, and then we also look at the effect on the ecosystem, and then the agri productivity, and then how that affects the food and nutrition in terms of availability, in terms of utilization, and also in terms of stability or security of supply. All the other aspects contribute to food availability and also security and nutrition. So anything that happens to availability, access, utilization, and stability definitely translate into having negative effect on the food value chain. So this gives us an idea of how food, how climate change affects food value chains and the likelihood of how that will impact on business in the retail food industry. Can we move on, please? Next slide. Yeah, so the food retail business in Nigeria. Food retail business include retail sales of all food products, both packaged and unpackaged, as well as beverages, including sales of all alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages. But when we disaggregate into formal and informal sector, we now realize that in Nigeria, the industry is in the informal sector, and in most cases, the products are not packaged. And if you disaggregate into north and south, you now find out that yes, in the south you find more informal retail outlets, but that is not so in the north. So if you want to aggregate and have a clearer or better picture of what obtains, particularly in the food retail business in Nigeria, then it will be more to focus on the informal sector, where majority source their food from, unlike in the retail. But let me also add that whatever we are presenting, what I'm presenting here is work in progress. The work is still ongoing. So these are like some of the preliminary findings. And in the first phase, we have focused more on the informal sector, where you likely have more of open markets spread across urban, semi-urban, and also rural areas. Though our study tends to focus more on urban and semi-urban, particularly on the retail, but when it has to do with production, then of course it has to do with the rural communities, where much of those food that we are talking of are produced. And of course, there are also some statistics given by National Bureau of Statistics on how much Nigeria generates from retail food business in 104.6 billion, and an increase of 11.7% between 2018 and 2020. So growth in the industry, that's the retail food industry, is driven by the recent expansion in the modern retail sector in Nigeria. Of course, we have been having an expansion in the retail food sector, where many processing, package, and stock products in supermarkets are being sold to the end users. So, to an extent, we are beginning to see modernization in the retail food industry in Nigeria. That's going to say that it has reached a significant stage compared to the advanced countries. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, looking at the impact of climate change on food industry, of course, I've already mentioned some of this. It is impacting on forestry, biodiversity, and through that is having implications on food industry. Crops are sensitive to temperature changes. Potatoes, soybeans, we are going to see how some of these in the process are being lost due to certain handlings. You can also look at rice, corn, and wheat, which have optimal growth and then we said with increased temperature, we are beginning to have challenges in growing some of these crops in their traditional localities. And of course, the ultraviolet rays is damaging to plants and also to animals. And we know that some of the staple foods like bread and bakery products too are also being affected. Bread is a staple food and so in Nigeria, and many households it has become a daily food for consumption. I also mentioned pests, and then some are also becoming resilient to chemicals or pesticides. That hitherto was effective in controlling pests and other forms of diseases that farmers are encountering. Then, of course, there's also a level of damaging in the water that is affecting fishes. We have also seen that deforestation that is also harming agricultural practices in some communities, particularly in the north, and making the production of certain products almost impossible as it is now. So this is impacting negatively on what is being supplied in the market and the food industry generally. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, these slides tend to summarize some of the effects of or impact of climate change on food industry. So we can categorize it as one, the agricultural food is being damaged from production to processing to storage, and also in the process of transporting to the final consumers. Then I also mentioned issues around radiation that is damage to biolife, and I also talked about issues around some of the staples like bread and bakery that is making them to have less nutritional value. Then I talk about the effect of pests on agriculture, pests, diseases, and insects that are now damaging some of the products that are being produced. And then, of course, it's also affecting crop yields. Many farmers are no longer having the expected yield given the hectares that they are cultivating. And then the seafood too is also being affected. So in terms of production, that will also be less than what used to be before. Then there are also environmental effects on livestock, and that in a way also affects what can be extracted from the environment. We've talked of forests and other services that we can also generate. But of course, there is also another effect that we are having. The human activities too is also impacting on the climate itself. So it's a two-way thing. While the climate is having its impact, human activities too is also having its own impact. So we need a holistic approach to look at how these impacts can be reduced, and that by implication will also reduce the threat that the food industry is facing. Now, next slide, please. So because I've talked of agricultural value chain, because before we can talk of the retail food industry, we look at the value chain in its entirety. Then we can look at, because the effect has a rundown effect from production to the point where the final consumer will access the product. So if you look at the Nigerian agricultural value chains, it highly depends on the climate change. The fluctuation in climate patterns, of course, is affecting the production. And this, in a way, is disrupting food supply, is also affecting the quality of food produced. I also mentioned earlier the yield, and then, of course, exposure to weed and pests. So if we were to classify the agricultural value chain, we can classify it into four. One is the pre-upstream, the second one is the upstream, the third one is the midstream, and then of course the last one is the downstream, where we have the retail business and agriculture in food industry. But let's bear in mind that the smallholder farmers and low-income earners are the most exposed to the climate change threat. And I said earlier that they also make up the larger population that are engaged in producing the food that we are talking of here in Nigeria. Can we have the next slide, please? Yes, so you can see the components. You can see the pre-upstream that has to do with research for innovation, and we can also talk of inputs and mechanization. In Nigeria, we have not been able to mechanize an agricultural process. The large chunk of the peasant farmers still use crude or local implements. So that's in a way so that we have not been able to transform that sector and reap the expected benefit or potential that that sector holds for Nigeria. Then if you look at the upstream and you look at the activities, we are talking of primary production and harvest. We are talking of primary processing. We are also talking of primary transport and then the primary storage. In most cases, some of these are done locally. Then if you look at the midstream, we talk of value-added processing. We are making progress, but the percentage is still low. We are talking of logistics, transport, and warehousing. In terms of logistics, the roads are to a large extent not much ready. So even some of the communities that food is being produced, some of them are not even accessible. And there it is difficult to transport and to also store. And some of them, in a way, are also perishable, like tomato or even grains that they have, or some of the root crops that they produce also have limited time that they can be kept in the unconducive warehouses. Then, of course, in the midstream, we also have the wholesale. And then, when you look at the downstream, where we have the retail and the customer market, I remember I have said it is largely locally organized in an informal way. Then, of course, we also have the industrial market. Where in recent time we are beginning to see an expansion in places like ShopRite and the rest. Then, of course, we also look at the issues on the export market. So, if you look at our topic focuses more on the downstream, which is the retail, where indirectly will be consumers of the products that we are actually talking about. But of course, like I also said, we cannot really separate the pre-upstream with the upstream, the midstream, and then the downstream, because whatever happens right from the pre-upstream will translate into what will happen in the downstream. Can we happen the next slide, please? Okay, so value chain. I'm sorry, here is a bit tiny here, but also I wanted to look at how the agricultural value chain is being impacted by the climate. So the pre-upstream, upstream, the midstream, and the downstream. And if you look at the downstream, which is the focus of this, I'm sure later we'll share this, the slides so that we can actually zoom and see what is there. You can see that climate change, such as flood, is disrupting distribution. At some points in Nigeria, because of floods, some roads could not be accessible, and many cars or suppliers were cut up that have to spend days on their ways, and some of them to occur because some were perishable. Even the ones that were not perishable, there are a lot of damages, and that caused a lot of disruption. Of course, there's one major route that connects the north and the south, which leads through Kogi, and because of security challenge between the corridor too that would have linked through Kaduna and Kwara, most times people tend to focus on Kaduna, Abuja, Lokoja corridor to the south. So the floods that took some days overflowed the boundaries and cars could not move. Those coming from Indian products from Lagos side or from the south up north could not move. The same thing from up north down south, they could not also move because of floods and poor roads maintenance culture, and many other communities too, because the floods also cause a lot of damage along along the retail industry. Then, of course, issues around temperatures. Nigeria is having some challenges in terms of power generation, and we dwell more on electricity. We don't really have much access to renewable energy. So, to a large extent, there is also the epileptic supply of electricity. So that has also affected the level of storage and also the processing, especially smallholder farmers and also market men and women who don't really have access to either renewable or other forms of generating power, like using generators and the rest. So to a large extent, those who cannot preserve their products are having difficulties. And if you look at the pre, we are talking of 40% in the agricultural production. And this is very high in terms of how much we are producing and also how much we are losing and the impact that we have in the retail market. But at the end of the day, no matter what is produced, if it doesn't get to the quantity required, does not get to the market, then issues around prices will remain as we are facing now. And this also, we can add to the crisis that the climate change is also, we also see between pastoralists and the farmers. And this crisis has also led to the destructions of farms. The food grown by some of the farmers in some of the middle states that I earlier mentioned, and to a large extent, if we put these factors together, we can then see that climate has really affected the country or the total supply of food in the retail market. Next slide, please. So let's now look at the food loss and waste along the value chain in Nigeria. You can see that the loss and the waste occur at different locations along the value chain. In this case, because of the fact that I said we tend to focus on the local production. So we now try to look at the categories of products or commodities that are being produced. And we take the cereals where we use maize as a case study. And then we also look at the vegetables where we use tomatoes as the case study. And then we now look at the catfish, which now represents the meat and also the fishes available for consumption. And we now look at the quantum that is being lost in the value chain and how that affects the retail food industry in Nigeria. If you take tomatoes, for example, you now discover that the total loss rate is about 76%. And its greenhouse, then about 76%. And then the total catfish losses is about 34%. And then if you look at the catfish, it has the lowest with 25%. So if you now look at the losses and the waste based on the value chain, you now see that from tomatoes, it has the highest. And you are now looking at the value chain in terms of transporting it, handling, and also storage. So if you are looking at the value chain now and how that affects the retail food, you now see that transport, handling, and storage has the highest contributor with 51%. Then production has 25%, and retail has 10%. But if you take maize, which to an extent is less compared to tomato, you now discover that the waste in terms of transport, handling, and storage is 13.9%, while the wholesale and retail for catfish is 15%. For maize, it tends to be more. Sorry, for catfish, it tends to be more compared to that of the maize. So, but in any case, this loss, because some of these products are also the products that are largely consumed by households in Nigeria, or the consumers. So if we are losing this much, that also means that the loss, partly because of climate effect, is also contributing to either the price increase that we are having or the quantity that is also available for consumption. And all this contributes to the nutritional value of what we consume in our homes here in Nigeria. The nutrients that we are talking of, and also the calories too, the sugar contents, and the rest. So these three are only selected for the sake of discussing them here. But we have ample products that if we begin to look at them, then we also see different level of losses and waste that is being experienced in the food value chain. But overall, the rate of loss and wastages is high as far as food value chain is concerned in Nigeria, as a result of probably low technology use and also lack of basic facilities or infrastructure in terms of transporting them, in terms of handling them in terms of harvesting, processing, and packaging, and also storage. These are issues of concern as far as the sector or agricultural value chain or food supply is concerned in Nigeria. Can we move to the next slide, please? I hope I can be a bit faster. Yes, so the last slide only speaks to what we have here. Remember, I said if you look at the total loss of the food in terms of maize, I said it's 25%, tomatoes is 76%, and then catfish is 34%. That's the total. Then you have production, you have transport, handling, and storage. Then you have processing. Then you have wholesale and retail, and then you have consumers. Consuming. Loss and wastages at the consumption level is low, but at the transport, processing, and production, there are varying degrees that is largely contributing to total food losses. Next slide, please. So now we are looking at the production losses and how that is impacting on maize and tomatoes and aquaculture, which in our own case we use catfish. Of course, like I said earlier, maize is the dominant staple produced in Nigeria, and in recent times, we have also seen upsurge in the production of rice. And of course, we are looking at how that is to calories and sufficiency in terms of food security. Tomatoes is also important. It's one form of vegetable, but highly perishable. And of course, it has a lot of micronutrients. Same thing with fish, which is also widely consumed and the largest source of protein. So, many families in Nigeria see this as the consumption consumed by families depends on size and also the income level, and also the diversity in what is being consumed in the families, and also what is being assessed and utilized. You can see the quantity of maize that is being produced yearly, and then of course tomatoes too, and also the fishes. Let's see how much we are losing in terms of monetary value in the next slide, please. Yeah, so you can see in monetary value that maize, the total volume yearly is 10.4 million tons. The total value lost is 702 million. And then the land loss is 1,655 hectares. 1,655,000 hectares. Then in terms of tomatoes, it's 4.1 million tons being produced yearly. And then what is being lost, 4 billion, and the total land mass is 447,033 acres. Then in cash is 90,000 tons. Then what is being lost is about the total value is about $133 million. So you can see what Nigeria in terms of revenue now. From production to the final consumer, the value chain that we have mentioned before. So this is much. We also look at Nigeria is also having the crisis of revenue, and then we begin to look at how much is being lost in the value chain. We take agricultural productivity and also the threat of hunger and poverty in Nigeria. Then we will now see that much needs to be done in order to curtail or address this loss that the country is experiencing at the moment. Next slide, please. So here we are looking at the drivers of the food loss and waste along the value chain. I remember I said we are looking at different components of maize that represent the cereals, the vegetables, and then the tomatoes, and then fishes, where we are looking at the catfish. So of concern to us is the wholesale and the retail. And if you look at the drivers of the losses and waste, you now see increase in the capacity. Increase in the cooling capacity along the Lakaji means Lagos, Kano, and Jibia. Jibia is in Katsina. there's a road that links. So, and like I said earlier too, that most of the products comes from the north via south. And in most cases, you find out that there are open trucks that convey these food products without any form of proper storage that can preserve the product from the north to the south without much damage, particularly products like tomatoes or catfish. So in a way, spending 2, 3, 4, 5 or more days on the road usually cause large damage to the retailers. Even live animals that are being transported. Of course, we also have sometimes a lot of loss along the way. Then, of course, we also have the integrated cold chain from farm. So, from the processing and between harvesting and the market, there is also a challenge of how the products are processed, packaged, and also conveyed. So this space, in a way, also has its own effect. And then also, we need to also look at connectivity to electricity and also the basic infrastructure like roads. Of course, we need roads to transport them, and the roads should be good enough. And then, of course, we also need some form of preservation where we need electricity or cars that probably have cold rooms that can convey some of these perishable products to far or distant states, which in a way will reduce this food losses and also waste along the way that the country is experiencing at the moment. Next slide, please. I think, okay, there's a mistake in that the heading, but we have already talked about how much loss between the developing and low-income countries. We have talked of 40% of total production, and where it also occurs each year. And then, of course, I also mentioned the 30% of the total land loss, and also contribute 5% of the country's greenhouse gas emission. Then, the loss represents 9.1% of Nigeria's GDP. At the same time, 44% of Nigerians are food insecure. So if you put this side by side with how much is being lost and how much is being lost or wasted, and then the total percentage of Nigerians that are also facing food insecurity, then it shows that much needs to be done in order to sustain and stabilize the retail and also the wholesale food industry. Then I've also said earlier that 40% of food losses in high-income countries occur in retail and consumer levels. So you can see that in high-income countries, it is from the retail and consumer levels. But the same percentage that in low-income and developing countries, it is from the storage, the transport, processing. So you can see the differences between where food is lost in high income and also where food is lost in low income. So what this implies is that in high income countries, processing, transporting, packaging, storage, preservation is not really an issue, unlike in low income countries. But it is largely at the retail and consumer level. So approaches to this too will also differ, with more concern at the low income countries, where it is only at the consumer level that the wastages and the losses are less. But all other four stages or components of the value chain, the losses and the wastages are high. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that talks about how much is being lost in the supply value chain, both in terms of countries, low-income countries, high-income countries. As I said, you can see 40% of food losses in low-income countries occur. So these are the levels of concern for the retail business food industry, unlike in the high-income countries where it actually occurs at the retail and consumer levels. So this has shown that while there are food wastages, but the stage at which it occurs differs among low income and also high income. And so, for the businessmen in low income countries, the focus on reducing the losses should be on storage, should be on transportation, and should also be on processing. But for the high income, of course, and also consumer levels. And for the low income, that's the country, the area where Nigeria belongs. And so the focus of our discussion is on the low income countries. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide? So, having discussed what the impact of climate change and also how it's causing wastage and losses in the food value chain, I now try to draw a relationship to help us explain the business model on food retail industry in Nigeria. Of course, I've emphasized that the losses is spread and cut across the value chain. And then, of course, I also adapt the principles of the global framework that gives us 6 distinct stages in the food supply chain, which is the post-harvest at the farm level, then the transportation, handling, and storage, and then the processing, retailing, hotels, restaurants, and institutions, and then at homes and also away from homes consumption. Of course, restaurants are away from homes, hotels are away from homes, and others. So the model highlights intervention at one level of the chain, such as reduction in the waste rates at the retail level through improved food storage system, which is key if we want to reduce the level of losses and also waste in food industry or food value chain. And the model also shows that the direction and magnitude of the indirect effect depends on the interaction of supply and demand elasticities at each level of the chain. So the ones with high degree of elasticity, of course, it becomes inelastic, and the ones with low will likely change or impact because of the less felt. So let's see the model. Next slide, please. Yes, so you can see the stages of the vertical food supply chain, which is also the model we are looking at. So from the production, you can see the other 6 subgroups, which is transport, handling, and storage. Then, of course, you can also see the processing. And now you can also look at the retailer. And then some people will be food services. You know, we talk about the hoteliers and restaurants and some institutions that fits at home and also away from home. So you can see food services are provided away from home. Then retailers can meet the needs of it. So production is where important activities are carried out, productive activities or productivities in the sector. Then, of course, once you start transporting, handling, and storage, then, of course, care must be taken in order to ensure that the product's quality and also value is maintained, which can be processed and then whether in the wholesale now, and then the retailers can have access. And then, of course, when we're talking about food, it's both the processed and the unprocessed. So it is a whole gamut of issues put together. So it's not just processing. In some of the retail markets, food is not processed. It's sold in its raw form. So whether processed or unprocessed is of concern to us in this study. So this is the relationship that we are trying to build. And why this is important is to look at how the retailers in the food industry are impacting in the lives of consumers, both at home and away from home. Because everything that happens in the value chain culminate into what the retailers will be able to provide for the final consumers. Next slide, please. So, the data we collected, remember I said is work in progress. So, we are still collecting data, but these are our preliminary investigation. And what we do is in collecting the data, you can see that some of the data are analyzed as secondary data that we were able to source as stabilized facts. But in collecting our qualitative data, which is still work in progress, you can see that the study population comprised of food products, farmers, both packaged and unpackaged. Then we're also looking at beverages too. Then we're also looking at in terms of states of concern. We decided to pick 3 states from the south who are largely contributing to the food basket in Nigeria. And then we also picked 3 states in the south, which is Lagos, Rivers, and Anambra, cutting across the geopolitical zones. And in terms of more formal engagement and packaged foods, we have more in the south, in areas like Rivers, particularly in Lagos or Anambra, but in the north, where we actually pick some of the cereals that fit the south, these 3 states that we selected are key or essential for our discussions. And remember, we are also using purposive and cluster sampling. Purposive because we have a particular direction or focus on those producing, on retail food industry. And then clusters because there are particular areas that are of significance to our study. And that's why we have some of these states where we are taking our data from. You can see that our talk of sampling procedure, and then we're also looking at the sample of 836. And then, of course, it's the structured questionnaire that we are using. So, a logic is a we actually use. It's a public model that we actually use, and we try to present it in its simpler form. We are also trying to analyze the data. And I said, for the sake of these presentations, we have our preliminary findings that when we finalize, the results may not necessarily be the same because we may be getting more data and also covering more areas. So the results may change. But the good thing is we'll be sharing our final study after this preliminary presentation. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so remember we are looking at the relationship between climate change and retail businesses in food industry. Of course, we have talked about the effect of the climate change. So going forward, we decided to look at how businesses are trying to adapt to this climate, particularly extreme climate risks that they are facing, which we have also mentioned. So we then classify it into sustainable, unsustainable, and also what future plans do they have. And then we try to do a probabilistic analysis of the impact that is having on the retail food industry. So if you look at the number of extreme events or number of events now in terms of climate change, droughts, desertation, increased temperature, and the rest, you can see that the future planning it does not seem to show that we are really having making progress in terms of future planning as far as mitigating or adapting to climate change is concerned. You can see that it is actually declining. If you also look at the unsustainable, because you have to look at the sustainable ways, from the responses we got or what they are doing in order to sustain their adaptive measures against the climate change. You can also see that it is not actually, it is rather showing an increase of unsustainability. And what we also realize from preliminary investigation is that, yes, most of the farmers, especially the local ones, where food is being generated from, because you must start from there, and some of what they are using, for you to be able to understand what also the retail food vendors are also doing, you find out that it is largely personal effort that they are making, and it is becoming in a way that they are not able to use the appropriate technology that will help them to sustain the, the mitigation or their innovation in trying to adapt and reduce the impact of the climate change that is having on the agricultural food value chain. So, to this extent, we can then say that there is much to be done in the retail food industry when it comes to mitigating or adapting to appropriate technology or measures that can help to transport, to preserve, and also to store some of these products, coupled with the infrastructure crisis that the economy is having. So, it is a serious challenge that we are having, and that is why if we tie this to the losses, you can then see that because of lack of this proper planning for the future, and also the unsustainable manner in which the producers of those commodities and also the retailers in the food industry are faced with, most times, even during the harvest period, barely 3 months from that period, farmers start having crisis. So, we need to look at the bigger picture of how the retail industry, looking at how it is linked to the transport, the handling, the processing, and collaborate in order to devise appropriate and also sustainable ways on ensuring that food is being preserved, and also what is applied is also appropriate, because some of the chemicals that are being used and also the pests are inorganic, are also affecting the products, so that even when you store, some of them tend to last not at the expected period that we would have initially. Like we have the problems of these things, we have especially root crops that expectedly we used to have lasting a relatively few or months. These years we are beginning to see that yams got rotten because of certain things that have been applied. The same thing that applies to other food crops. So we need to see other ways that are more sustainable when it comes to preservation, and which can also help to adapt to better measures in addressing climate change. Let me have the next slide, please. So we try to do it by very probing regression in terms of sustainability and unsustainability, and then looking at the marginal effects. And these are some of the variables we are looking at that can help to mitigate. Of course, in terms of the number of the extremes, that is the extreme weather conditions as a result of the climate change. Some of the variables that we then are looking at as the mitigating factors or innovations that can help to address. We are looking at how businesses are trained or the retail food industry. And then we're also looking at the business size of the business. I remember I've said most of them are actually business farmers. Size. We also look at households are engaged, since most of them are not business organizations. So it's largely household kind of production. Then we're also looking at financial barriers. Sometimes you need financial support in order to address a lot of things that has to do with climate change, issues of drought, and then of course some are resulting into season farming. But of course, if the water is not much available, then that is also impossible. Then we're looking at access to information. Information is key, but even most of the farmers don't really have the requisite information that will guide some of their behavior or farming activities. Even in the retail industries, retail food industry, there are some of the businessmen there who don't really have the information. So without requisite information, you probably don't have problems in the food value chain on the access, preservation, transportation, packaging, and processing in a way. Then we're also looking at distance to the market, whether it's because some of these are produced in the hinterland. So what is the likely effect that the market is having? It has to do with the food industry. So those markets that cannot be accessed, the number of days could be delayed. Sometimes the manner of transportation also depends on some of the areas that could not be accessed, so it takes longer time to get to the market. And then of course we can also look at the location, rural, semi-urban or urban. And we know in most of these are in disaggregate in terms of production or agri-productive activities. Value chain is largely in the rural areas and some semi-rural. But if you talk of others like processing, where you transport to where you package and you process, of course you can look at semi and also other areas. So the retail cut across, because we find retail markets in both urban, semi-urban, and also local markets. But in most cases, because of the high concentration of population in rural areas, there is also much activities that is also taking effect there, whilst we talk of food industry in Nigeria generally. Then we're looking at the general support. In this case, it can be institutional support. These days we have government, we have private sector, we also have non-governmental organizations or non-states. So how are they also influencing or helping the retail businesses or agricultural value chain in trying to mitigate the impact of climate change in agricultural food production or productivity? And in a way, support has really not been accessible by most of these farmers that we are talking about. And the same thing too with the retailers in the food businesses, except bigger companies or organizations that have huge capital outlay and can be able to provide the financial support, that have the financial muscle and are able to devise means of supporting its retail business in terms of transportation or preservation, handling, processing, and also storage that lasts for longer times and also still maintains its quality and value. But that cannot be said of small peasant farmers. Then, of course, the adaptation assistance. Well, without the general support, we can tie the two together. Whether that is, yes, some few are getting, but to a larger extent, we still discover that the larger percentage have not been able to have access to this, and in a way, it's largely affecting the information available and also access to the market and also the support that would have come in a way in order to help to also maintain the quality and to also help farmers to increase their yield and income at the end of the day, because that's one of the aspects of the retail food industry. There is the income component and there's also from the demand and supply side. You can look at those that are consumption side, which is on the demand, and of course those supplying are also looking at the aspect of how much income they can. So to a large extent, if you look at the food value chain, then we can begin to take the supply side and also take the demand side. And the supply side has been hit hard by the climate change, and which has also affected the demand side. Because sometimes when there is shortage in supply, then to a large extent that translates into the quantity, into access, into availability, and also utilization. And that application too also translates into the nutritional value that consumers are getting from those products, which also has health implications. I think so. Next slide, please. I think that will be last or second to the last. So, what are some of the responses? There has been global response that countries are keen into, especially when we look at the Paris Agreement and also the other one is I know there is Paris Agreement and also the okay, probably when I remember. So in this case, we find out that Nigeria has set up a committee to help in the sustainable climate change adaptation with the period between 2019 and 2023, which is this year. So the committee is actually working, but I cannot, since I don't really have any facts to back the level at which or what the committee has been able to achieve at the moment. However, from the government perspective, there has been some special institutional interventions and support to enhance, adapt, access to information, and also more resilience and high yield seeds and capabilities of the farmers being provided by some of the government institutions. We have seen some from the central bank, some from the Ministry of Agriculture, and some non-governmental organizations working around agriculture. But that to an extent is also has not achieved much. This we can say for sure because the basic infrastructure that is required to sustain that sector is not available in the agricultural value chain. So for as long as we don't have the basic infrastructure and technology to support whatever the government are doing at the moment, may not yield the expected or immediate results. Then, of course, there are also some aspects of financial and technical support that has been provided, some by local organizations, some by international, and also on the basis of global conventions and agreements. And the recent one also talks about high income or advanced countries supporting the low income countries, which Nigeria is also expected to benefit. So any benefit that comes in the value chain will also translate into benefits for the retail food industry, retail businesses industry. Then, of course, we also have emphasis on green agriculture or green economy that is focusing on renewable energy and also using more organic ways of production compared to chemical-driven processes as it is now. Then, based on our probit model, where you can see that issues around information, issues around support, and issues around location and market access, it is that the retail businesses are engaged in more trainings in terms of engaging in corporate strategies and mitigations against climate change impacts, and also embark on more friendly or more friendly or green commodities that should be sold in the market. Then, of course, at the production level, we are also looking at the production of more climate resilient commodities and products, and of course, trying to curb hazards that generally have impacts on both health of humans and also animals, and also hazardous to the environment. I think the last slide, please. So, in conclusion, change in climate are not uniform across regions. Not only regions, but even within countries. Like I said earlier, that what is happening in the north is not exactly the same with what is happening in the southern part of the country. However, its impact on retail food industry seems to have widespread impact, both in the north and in the south, because some of the things produced in the north are supplied to the south, and some of the things produced in the south are supplied to the north. So there is a cross-cutting impact between the north and the south. And then the effect of climate change on food production, processing, and retailing is of concern. And one of it is the infrastructure gap, and also what we can link to the ease of doing business in Nigeria. Transportation issues. There are also tax issues, the inflationary pressures, and then lack of access to markets are all some of the things that are actually affecting, some of which are an offshoot of climate change. But then, climate change has also relates to the negative impact, because there is a direct impact and there is also the indirect impact. Like the inflationary pressures are indirect impacts of climate change. So the environment is having the degrading effects of climate change, where we have floods, we have droughts, and high temperatures that is creating changes in the ecosystem, and is also impacting on the livestock and the food industry. What are some of our suggestions? One, as a matter of necessity, government need to be more proactive. Of course, in most cases, there are a lot of discussions around climate adaptation, yet we see less action from the government. So government need to be more proactive. And I give you an instance. Some years back, government embarked on, with the assistance of World Bank, this great work across the Sahel. I think up to date, not much, to an extent, not much progress. There was some progress initially, and at some points up to now, that seems to have stopped. So we need to see more progress in such programs that tend to mitigate climate change, especially issues around desertification in the Sahel and part of the Sudan Savannah region. Also, more adaptive technologies, both for the farmers and the wholesale and the retailers. In most cases, those technologies are not available, and to a large extent, it has become so challenging that farmers these days don't really reap the benefits of their production because they are always in a hurry to sell immediately after harvest because they lack the basic facilities for storage and for preservation and also to process their products. So this is not good for the food value chain. That's why in the terms of harvest, there is so much in the market. A few months after, farmers might have sold off and only have what to consume. That usually affects their income because it is people who are in the wholesale business or large, medium or large businesses that can afford better transport network, storage facilities, and then processing capabilities for the time being, and at some points they now are now able to exchange at higher prices at the expense of the farmers. Then of course there are also good practices, one of which I earlier mentioned the green, whether green economy, green agriculture, or more organic processes that preserve quality and also the yields, and also reduce the impact of pests, diseases, and other things that also affect the food products, especially the ones that are perishable. Then, of course, on the government side, appropriate designs of policies, like the one I said, and also institutional and governance system that can help to scale up government activities around the mitigation and impact of climate change on the Nigerian economy. And to this end, I say thank you for listening. Last slide, please. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and over to the facilitator.
Thank you very much, Professor Auta. We really appreciate your contributions and discussions. They've been very detailed, actually. It's actually sequel to what I am actually working on down here in Lisbon. A lot of issues you mentioned actually synchronizes with what my postdoctoral research has been on. But it's just that there are some. It's just that the focus of the research team I recently I'm currently consulting for has been on Niger, Burkina Faso, Ghana, and North African countries. The finding of your group or rather of your team is actually very interesting. Something that we really need to work on. Hopefully, in the nearest future, we might in the coming months, we might have to reach out to you with respect to your findings. They are very, very interesting. I would like to see. We would like to have a detail. There's a professor we're expecting from Germany, and we're working towards doing a proposal on climate change impact in Nigeria and some other countries. Thank you very much for this presentation. We would be working with. I think we would like to work with your team in the coming months. Let's have maybe by April when the prof comes from Germany, we'll be able to work together to see what we can actually get from the EU to work with your team. With respect to this presentation, I really you really have touched most of what I would have loved to hit on. Let me begin by refreshing our minds on the fact that we are talking about the sixth largest, most populated country in the world. It's the country where it's said one of every black man comes from. We're talking about an economy that is that used to be an agrarian economy, highly dependent on agriculture and export, and agriculture exporting country. But the discovery of petroleum in the 70s, mid 70s, and the oil boom of early 70s and oil boom of the mid to late 70s has declined the interest in agriculture. This has actually snowballed over time into abandonment of the agricultural value chain. The retail value chain like you rightly discussed actually belong to the downstream area of the four categories of the value chain: the upstream, the upstream, the mid upstream, and then the downstream. We are the downstream sector, like you discussed in detail, is highly challenged by climate change. Although those in the upstream and upstream are more challenged than the midstream and the downstream, but the downstream is still very much challenged, and they also contribute to climate change in Nigeria, considering the fact that vehicles that are used to transport goods from one point to the other are mostly dependent on petroleum. They use petroleum and they also contribute to the environmental, to the greenhouse emission. They are actually very important factors that I noticed in your presentation that we should actually look forward to helping the society to resolve, especially with the issues of traditional absence of of sustainable adaptation strategies. If we look at the sustainability science and sustainable development goals, it prioritizes three areas or four areas: the sustainability of the planet and human sustainability, then environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and societal sustainability, and social sustainability. And at each of these stages, there should be profitable. Each of these stages should be profitable to the stakeholders at each stage. And in Nigeria, there is poor contribution to traditional adaptation strategies, which you rightly mentioned is affecting the retail industry, as well as even the upstream and pre-upstream, especially the upstream, the farmers, and the way they do their businesses. If we look at in Senegal, there has been different adaptation strategies that have been introduced over time, and the people have adapted to traditional methods, and they use they have a radio a local radio system, or a local radio program across the country in different radio stations. Journalists were trained, and these journalists weekly update farmers on recent development strategies, which is missing in Nigeria. These are things that we actually need to take to our people. Most of our people do not have the right information, like you rightly mentioned. And this is an area we can actually push at the government to actually wake up on. There is also the the absence of concurrency between what is in vogue today and what is practiced in Nigeria. What is in vogue today, most people are pushing, most societies or science is pushing for organic agriculture, which people have derailed from. We are used to farming organically, using manure from our animals to manure our farms and all that. But over time, our people have learned to go with fertilizers and chemicals, which are not organic and which is actually affecting the health of our people. It is not sustainable. And like you rightly mentioned, these are areas we need to actually emphasize on, to take information down to farmers, through to those in the retail sector, because they also preserve. They try to preserve these products using different chemicals, and this is not sustainable. These are areas that we actually need to hit seriously on, so that at each level there is sustainability. At each level there is a concern for the human sustainability, the human life and human health. My contribution would be in respect to this, just to add up. You have actually exhausted all I wanted to say personally, but I want to also emphasize the fact that we are looking at a country which is expecting, we are looking at a part of the world where the greatest population growth is expected to emanate from, or is currently emanating from. We have sub-Saharan Africa contributing to the greatest population growth. We have 8 point something billion in the world today, and it is expected to keep growing only majorly in sub-Saharan Africa. And by 2000, one out of every 3 person in the world is expected to be a black person, a person from somebody from sub-Saharan Africa, meaning that the population of sub-Saharan Africa is surely growing because of the huge youth population there. And the world is actually interested in sub-Saharan Africa because it is one point where the sustainability of the global workforce is dependent on. Very soon, most countries here in Europe and in every other Western, in most other Western world, would have a population decline in terms of labor force. Most people are retiring now in the UK, US, Australia, Canada, down through Switzerland and France, everywhere. The population of the aging population is actually increasing. People are, in the next 20, 30 years, we would be having a population, we might be having a labor force crisis, and the population of in Europe might be a place to look at, especially with the responses we are having thanks to climate change. People are moving, migration everywhere, and this is actually helping to cushion certain gap that exists at the employment level in most societies in Europe, especially. I would want to draw our mind to the fact that there are particular areas where we could actually help the ordinary man in the society in Nigeria, to be precise, because since the government have been talking about diversification, and they really are doing less than something about it. It is actually time for us to see how best we can actually pass on the message, or rather strengthen the information gap, bridging the information gap in the society with these discoveries, and with organic farming, traditional resilience methods, traditional adaptation practices that are sustainable, not the almost sustainable ones. I really would want to appreciate. I would not have much to say at this point, because, like I did mention, you've actually covered a lot, and I'm trying to save time, because we've spent exhausted most of our time. I don't know if others have questions. I saw hands raised. Sorry, can we take questions and answers now? Thank you very much again, Professor Auta. Thank you very much for every other person who has taken their time to listen. Please, if there are questions, let's have them. Thank you.